and then we'll go ahead and get started. So this is Exponential Groups webinar, and so let's talk about what I mean by exponential groups. So this is me, and you're on here because you bought my book, so I recognize that. But I've been a pastor for over 25 years, 27 to be exact. My wife and I have been married coming up on 17 years. I have 4 kids who are currently 15, 11, 9, and 3, and 3 boys. My daughter is 9. And I've coached over 1,500 churches in the last 13 years. Since 2011, I've helped churches start over 14,000 groups. And what I do, I work with churches. I do individual coaching with some. I have coaching groups where I have 5 pastors or 5 churches at a time. Usually it's 5 pastors or directors at a time. We're kind of like Brady Bunch on GoToMeeting. I'm developing some online courses. My book, which you know about, and then my blog over at alanwhite.org. All right, so let's talk. Twitter, I'm at Alan White is my Twitter handle. Facebook.com, my page is Alan White Consulting. All right, so let's talk about types of growth in groups. And I am recording this. You can refer to it later on, but you can take whatever notes you feel like you want to take. Or you can take a nap, either way. We can have growth by addition, and we can have growth by multiplication. We can have growth by campaign, or we can have what I call exponential growth. So I'm going to go back and break each one of those down and talk about each. So growth by addition kind of goes like this. You look out at your congregation. This is the church I served here in Greenville, South Carolina. I was on staff for 4 years. So you look out at the congregation and you look at your people and you see them as being sheep without a shepherd. And that's kind of your attitude, because I have all of these sheep and they're without a shepherd. And so your focus becomes, well, if they're sheep without a shepherd, I need to connect our members into groups somehow, some way. And so the strategy tends to be, well, in order for them to have a group, I need to go out, I need to find somebody that could be their leader, I need to recruit that leader and train them, and then, put these people in a group with this leader. And this is kind of where we get into growth by addition. So the methodology tends to be, I have people that are interested in groups fill out some sort of a sign-up card or go onto the church website and pick out a group, and or they fill out a card and then we assign them to a group. The result of this is that you have a lot of effort, but you have very little results, and the reason is that you can never recruit enough leaders by yourself. The members, may not stick in those groups. And I think I maybe left a few slides out of here, so I'm going to fill in a little bit. Part of the sign-up card thing to me is like blind, going on a blind date. And I was a single pastor for 10 years, and people would always try to set me up because they felt sorry for poor Pastor Allen, who was all by himself. And you go to the door and you don't know who you're going to meet, and then you knock on the door, and sometimes you wish that you had never met the person. Sometimes it's okay, but it doesn't typically work out. I don't know very many people. I know a few, but I don't know very many people that have married their blind date. But what we do with the sign-up cards is we say, okay, well, because you're in this affinity, you live in this area of town, then we're going to place you in this group because it meets Tuesday night and it kind of meets most of your criteria. Well, then they walk up to the house. They've never met the people. They knock on the door. It's very similar to a blind date. And the person opens the door, and then the issue comes that, well, it may work, it may not work. It's probably going to be a little bit awkward. And the reality is groups don't really last. The church that I attend has a next steps area. So you go up to the next steps area if you want to sign up for membership class, if you want to sign up to be baptized, or whatever else. So you also go there and they have a bank of computers, and you look at the groups and you sign up to be in a group. So I talked to a friend of mine who's a small group director at one of the campuses and said, well, how many people did you have sign up for a group last week? And they said, well, we had 52 people sign up. And we said, okay, now out of the 52 that signed up, how many people were contacted by the group leader? And he said, oh, I've got that right here. And he looks it up and he says, 27 people were contacted by the group leader. So now we've already cut the number in half. And then the next question we asked was, now out of the 27, how many of them actually made it to a group? And his response was, that's the problem. I don't know. And so what I found is that, you assign a person to a group, either because they signed up on the sign-up card or the website. You assign the person to the group. The leader may or may not call them. The prospective member may or may not show up, or they may show up for the length of a series and then disappear as soon as the series is over, and there really is not enough relationship going or enough commitment to the idea of a small group to help sustain that. The other problem is that if you're handpicking leaders, if you have the next 100 years to do that, then you probably have enough time. But it takes a very long time because it's all centered on you or a group of people that are trying to meet people, trying to get to know them, trying to recruit them. And we did this for a few years and just got stuck because and part of it was my fault because I had to control the thing. So I would only recruit people that I knew, and I only knew so many people, even though I'd been at the church for 15 years. So let's go to growth by multiplication. Growth by multiplication looks at the congregation and asks, how can we multiply leaders? So you think, okay, we're going to pick some leaders, and then the idea is your focus is developing group leaders. So we start with some leaders, and then all of those leaders are going to look at their group, and they're going to find somebody who's going to be their apprentice. And they're going to recruit this apprentice. The apprentice is going to kind of get on-the-job training in the group, and then at a point in time, either the group is going to split and form two groups. So either the apprentice stays with the existing group, and the leader goes to start a new group, or the other way around, or they split the group down the middle, and one takes half, the other one takes the other half. And so this is what I thought was going to happen. That as our church began to grow, that we didn't grow dramatically, but we were growing by about 100 people a year. And so I needed to not only catch up with current growth, I also needed to anticipate the growth that was coming based on where we had been. This is our church in California. And so I have this plan that every year we were going to at least double or more with our groups. And so each of our leaders would select an apprentice, and then the apprentice would do a group, the leader would continue their group, and then the next year everybody would do the same thing again. And so on an annual basis we would double these groups. Maybe we'd recruit a few more other people in there, and then within 5 years we were going to be caught up to our current growth as well as our anticipated growth. And the reality was that we were a place where we were 7 years into our 5-year plan, and we got stuck. And my leaders couldn't find an apprentice. They would come up to me on Sunday morning because I put so much pressure on them, because I thought the future of our small group ministry rests on whether or not these leaders can recruit an apprentice and develop them. And they would look at their group and they'd say, I don't have any potential leaders in my group. There's nobody that I can invite to be an apprentice, which I thought was ridiculous because I was actually recruiting people out of their groups and putting them into my training and then launching their groups. But I put so much pressure on my leaders. They would walk up to me on Sunday morning and they would look me in the eye and they would say, first thing out of their mouth, I'm working on my apprentice. And I thought, man, whatever happened to hello? And, I felt bad because I was putting a lot of pressure on them, and it just backfired. So we got 7 years into this. We had 30% of our adults in groups, and we completely got stuck. And so the growth by multiplication, well, the result was that group members don't want to leave their group. I've had this debate with some people that really advocate this apprentice model, and they would say things to me like, well, the apprentice model works well in educated congregations, which I thought, gee whiz, thanks a lot, saying by inferring that my congregation was uneducated. And I kind of muttered under my breath, I said, the apprentice model works really well in Korea, because that's where it came out of, Dr. Cho's church in Korea. And it works great there. But I thought, well, in our culture, people like to stay together. We invite them to come in and get close like family, and then to ask them to split up or birth or whatever, you might as well just ask them to get a divorce, because that's what it feels like to them. So for us, there wasn't much multiplication in this multiplication model. Some people maybe do it a little better, but for us, it didn't happen. And the reason was that our leaders couldn't identify an apprentice, and the group members, they wanted to stay together. They didn't want to leave and go form another group. I think my slides are a little ordered. There was my stuck slide right there. We were stuck. So between addition and multiplication, we got to 30% and we were stuck. So then I'm going to go to what I call growth by campaign. And that is, we look at our congregation and we ask, can we connect 100% or more of our people into groups? And so that's kind of the idea, is how do we get everybody connected into a group in a very quick 6-week kind of a thing? And if you've done 40 Days of Purpose or something similar, you understand this. So the focus is connecting anybody and everybody. The strategy is that people will self-identify as a leader, or to use the language from Saddleback from 40 Days of Purpose, they would become a host. They would have a host home. So we don't even call them a leader because maybe they're intimidated by being a leader. And so people self-identify with leaders, which I think that's actually pretty good. The methodology is you have some sort of video-based curriculum, and that way it's easy for anybody to use, and the fact that the group is short-term. You offer them a 6-week group, or it could be 5 to 7 weeks or whatever, but it's a short-term commitment. They get to evaluate whether or not they want to be in the group, and then at the end of, they decide whether they want to continue or whether they, it's not their thing. But it's easier than recruiting somebody to a group and they say, well, what are the terms of commitment? And you say, well, the rest of your life. That's a little more than most people can commit to. And so in our church in the Central Valley of California, back in 2004, when we were stuck at 30%, my pastor was looking forward to the movie The Passion of the Christ being released because he'd already planned a sermon series. He knew that people coming out of the film would have spiritual questions. And so he planned this message series. He planned some advertising to let the community know we were going to do this series on the Passion of the Christ. So I walked into his office and I said, well, Pastor Dave, what if we launched groups alongside the Passion of the Christ? And he said, well, I think that's a great idea. See how I piggybacked on his idea there. And that worked really, really well. And so I said, well, here's the thing. I said, I found a study guide, but we need to make this easy for anybody to use. So we need to create a video, and you need to be on the video. Now, we had never done this before, and we decided to launch these groups 3 weeks before the series was going to start. So talk about crazy. And so I used my home video camera. It's the first video I ever edited. We shot it in the auditorium because that had the best lighting. And we were 1 week ahead of our leaders. And we output the video to VHS tape. And so every week I had this tape exchange going in my office. My leaders would bring in last week's tape. I would give them this week's tape. I would take last week's tape to the duplicator and it would become next week's tape. And so we shot this 6 weeks in a row just as they needed it because we didn't have time to do 6 all from the beginning. And DVDs weren't quite in vogue back then. And we did it. We just prayed that nobody would get sick, that we could actually do 6 videos 6 weeks in a row, or 1 video 6 weeks in a row. But here's the thing. He stood up on a Sunday morning and he said, we prepared these materials for you. And if you would open up your home and welcome some people, then we'll help you get your group started. And we doubled our groups in 1 day. Now, bear in mind, it had taken 7 years to get to 30% of our adults in groups. And in 1 day, we went from 30% to 60%, which created all kinds of issues with coaching and supporting the new leaders and all of that, which we had to figure out in a hurry. But growth by campaign, the result was we had a lot of excitement for 6 weeks. But if you don't have a plan of what goes beyond that 6 weeks, in a lot of places, the bottom falls out because you didn't offer them an option to continue, or they sign up for 6 weeks, they complete 6 weeks, and then they get this funny idea that they're done. But what we did see here was by people self-identifying as leaders and the fact that we could double our groups in the day, what we saw here was potential for exponential. And that was something that we were very excited about. Now, the reason that it didn't work so well was we didn't have a plan for after 6 weeks at the time. And the growth completely overwhelmed our coaching structure. So it was a little harder to support those leaders. But as we continued to do this, we got smarter in how we recruited coaches, who we recruited as leaders, how we formed groups, and then having that plan for them to continue. And within 6 months, we got to a place where we had 125% of our adult attendance in groups. Now, what that means is, at this church, we had 800 adults on the weekend, and we had 1,000 adults in groups. And so you do the math, it's 125%. Now, where did they come from? Well, it's not funny pastor math. We had groups that met in break rooms at work. People that had never attended our church were in a group connected to our small group. We had groups that met in coffee shops. I had one group that met on a commuter train that went from Stockton, California to San Jose every day, every Tuesday morning. They filled up an entire section of the train and they did the small group study together as a group. So I'm going to take a drink here and then we're going to go into Exponential. Because the campaign was pretty good. So how could Exponential be better? Well, here's the thing, is again, you look out at your congregation and you ask yourself, is this an audience or is this an army? Because if this is an audience, then I have to entertain that audience. I have to perform for that audience. I have to meet the needs of that audience to keep them coming back. But if this is an army, then I need to empower them and I need to equip them and I need to send them out. And so you can see the difference there in your perspective. So the focus is that every member can gather a group. So if you challenge your people and you say, hey, we have this easy to use study, and if you think about people that are in your life, your friends, your family, your coworkers, your neighbors, other people that you know in the community, who would enjoy or benefit from a study like this? And if they can gather a group, then it shows that they have a leadership ability. As Steve Gladen says, leaders have followers. That's how you know that they're leaders. So people may not think of themselves as being leaders, but if they can gather a group, then they are a leader. And I was commenting earlier that it used to be kind of the eye was on the prize of having 100% or more of your people connected into groups. But to me, nowadays, the number that we should be following is what percentage of our adults are leading groups or getting together with their friends and doing a study is another way to put it. And we don't call it leading a group, we call it getting together with your friends and doing a study. But they're effectively leading a group. And so every member can do this. Every member that has friends that can gather people, they can do this. The strategy is to give people permission and opportunity. And so you have to decide where you're going to be comfortable doing that in your church. So you may ask that people be members of your church in order to do this. Some churches, if you're breathing, you're qualified to do this. Others have a lot of qualifications. And so you really have to decide how many qualifications are we going to ask for up front, and then what qualifications are we going to delay in order to let people give it a try and see if they like a group. So think about it this way, and this is kind of a funny illustration for group leadership, but when you go to buy a car, when you buy the car, there is a lot of paperwork to fill out. You have to fill out all of the paperwork for the state, for your registration and all of that. If you're taking out a loan, you got a lot of loan paperwork. You got a lot of paperwork from the company that you're buying the car from, and all of that. So you're signing a lot of documents in order to buy a car. But most people, there's a process to buying the car. They look around the lot, they see one that they want to try, and then the next step of the process is the salesman asks if you want to take it for a test drive. Now, what's required for a test drive is a driver's license. What's required to own the car and take it home is a lot of paperwork. What's required for the test drive is a driver's license. And so when we do these 6-week studies and we say, would you get together with your friends and do this study, or would you open up your home and host a group? This is the test drive. So they're not agreeing to do an ongoing group yet, but they're wanting to take it for a test drive. And so for each church, what you have to feel good about and what you have to determine for yourself is, what is the driver's license for your church? What are the minimum requirements that you're going to ask for in order for a person to test drive a group and see if they like it? Then when they give an indication that they want to move forward, well, then that's when you can say, well, you need training, you need a coach, you need to go to membership class, you need all of these, and then you can add all of that on later as they want to become an officially recognized group in the church. but what do they need to have a test drive? And that's something that you have to decide. And every church that I work with is a little bit different in that. The methodology is, again, you want to offer an easy-to-use curriculum. Now, the curriculum does two things. I'm a big advocate of video curriculum, especially for new groups, for two reasons. One is that it's easy for the person to use. They don't have to do a lot of preparation. They don't have to be the teacher on the curriculum, because the teaching is the pastor, or the teaching is whoever, you bought the curriculum, and whoever that teacher is. It's usually better if it's the pastor of your own church, or pastors from your own church. But you have something that's easy to use. So that's one reason why it's good, is people can pop in the DVD, or they can pull up the video on streaming, and that's easy. And it doesn't take a ton of preparation. The other good thing about providing curriculum for these groups is you don't have to worry about what's being taught in the group, because you gave them the curriculum. And if you developed your own, what's being taught in the group is your teaching, or what's being taught in the group is the curriculum that you bought and paid for, that you felt good enough about, that you thought this would be appropriate for our church. So you don't have to worry about their teaching something that's out there and is loony or whatever, because you gave it to them. You give them some kind of basic training. I don't give them a ton of training at the beginning, because let's face it, a leader is not going to care about having an overly talkative person in their group until they have an overly talkative person in their group. And then they're going to say, what do I do with an overly talkative person? This guy in my group talks all the time and he won't be quiet. So you can train them so much at the beginning, you can actually talk them out of wanting to test drive the group, because you give them every problem scenario that could possibly be out there. Probably one of the worst situations ever happened in a group. And again, these are just so rare. But this person in a group walked up to the leader and said, how do I tell my wife that I used to be a woman before we got married? Now, you don't want to even give an inkling of a thought that a question like that may come up with the leader. So then the leader, of course, went to the small group pastor and said, hey, what do we do with this? And, we were scratching our heads a little bit on that one. So you just want to give them basic training, how to get the group started, how to gather members, how to do your first meeting, how to get everybody involved in participating, bringing refreshments and opening up their home, and maybe even leading the discussion. And then, you want to give them the support of a coach or an experienced leader. That's kind of the methodology in that. And to me, the coach is key. It's somebody that in the churches I served in, somebody that I knew, somebody that I trusted, that was getting to know that leader, that was checking in on them on a regular basis, answering their questions, encouraging them, and that was a great way to help groups get started. All right. The result is that people are connected both inside and outside of the church. So I had groups, sometimes entire groups, that the only person who attended our church was the leader of the group, and they had invited their friends who were outside of our church to participate in the group with them. And so that was great. But some people, their friends were in the church, and so they invited their friends that were in the church. And what we found was that because they had some kind of relational basis, people weren't being assigned to the group necessarily, and there's a way to help people that don't get invited. There's a way to help them get into a group that's not a sign-up card, it's not a website. But what we found was, because there were relationships already in the group, that the leader invited a few people that he knew, and the spouse invited a few people that she knew, and then the few people they invited a few more. So everybody wasn't necessarily connected to the leader, but everybody was connected to each other. And what we found was that groups of friends tend to last longer than groups of strangers. And so that actually gave us more momentum moving forward, because they already knew and liked the people that they were doing the group with. So there wasn't that hesitation of, I don't know if I want to stick with this group or not. The reason is, again, you leverage existing relationships. Who do they know that would enjoy or benefit from the study? Now, they don't want to put a group together and invite somebody over, and you want to tell them it's a Bible study. You don't want to say, oh, come over for dessert, and now I want to share this multi-level marketing opportunity with you. Nobody likes to be trapped in that situation. And but if they invite somebody and they say, hey, we're doing this Bible study about relationships, or we're doing this Bible study on how to deal with stress, or how to deal with kids, or whatever, would you be interested in coming and joining us? There are a lot of people that would be interested in that. And then the other side of it is you give people permission to start a group on their terms. Now, that doesn't mean that they're out there doing crazy things. What it means is they choose the night of the week, they choose the location, they choose who they want to do the study with, and it's a little more on their terms. I was just with a pastor who has an absolutely crazy schedule, and we were talking about his group involvement, and his involvement with a group that met on a set night of the week didn't work because he was out of town so much. And so he said, I'm really just thinking about getting a couple of friends together and then, that have kind of similar odd schedules, and then we could just be flexible about when we met. He said, I could be in a group like that. And I said, exactly. And there are other people, they work swing shift, so an evening group's not going to work. They work night shift, so maybe they need a group, for breakfast when they get off work. But there are people with special needs kids. I mean, there's all kinds of things. It's people that are more introverted that don't want to have 10 strangers coming to their house. But if they could determine 100% of who is going to be in their group, introverts are going to have 5 or 6 very good friends that they would invite to do a study with them. And they would be perfectly happy. They just don't want any strangers showing up. So again, you want to give them permission to start a group on their terms. So let me give you 4 keys to an exponential group launch. The first key is this: is your senior pastor all in? So I know in this particular presentation we have one senior pastor on here. We have one church without a senior pastor. But let me express this. See, some people would say, well, I would love that. I'd love my senior pastor to be all in, but my pastor doesn't talk about groups. My pastor's not in a group. My pastor doesn't preach about community. My pastor sees groups as one of many options, which is very much the case. And so one of the ways that you get your pastor more interested in groups is by putting your pastor's teaching on the curriculum. So this is Chip Ingram. I worked with his church, which is Venture Church out in Los Gatos, California in Silicon Valley. I worked with them a couple years ago. It's a church of 2,200. When I started working with them, they had 120 groups. We launched this series that we were shooting here called Holy Ambition. And with this series, we had 400 groups in this series. We went from 120 groups to 400 groups in the series. And then this past year, Chip told me they did a series called The Real God, and they had 500 groups this past fall. And again, in a church of 2,200. So that's kind of an exponential. You have more people in groups than you have attending your weekend worship service. The other thing is to find a small group solution for your pastor's every issue. So if you have any doubts about groups and what they can accomplish, what they can do, then I would highly recommend looking at Ed Stetzer and Eric Geiger's book called Transformational Groups. It's over there. I had to look at it. But it's based on research from Lifeway. And it talks about how people that are in groups give more than people who are not in groups. They serve more. They're discipled better. They're better connected. And all of these needs that we, as pastors think about and want, things that we desire for our members, that a vast majority of these needs are met in small groups. And so that's another good resource to look at. So like I said, studies show that people are in groups, they give more, they serve more. I mean, a lot of things happen. And again, it's based on research. I can tell you stories all day, but the research is the key. The second thing you want to do is you want to find a topic that's relevant. I've had churches do curriculum on, one of them, they start the year with a 21-day fast, which there's nothing against that. But launching groups on a study based, about fasting is kind of a difficult thing. Anything to do with money, generosity, tithing, capital campaigns, again, is a very challenging thing to do as far as getting people in groups. Or one church said, we want to do groups to teach our people to do evangelism. Again, nothing wrong with learning how to share your faith. However, a curriculum on teaching people to do evangelism was, again, a tough draw. And so what we did there was I convinced them, instead of doing a curriculum on evangelism, why don't they do a curriculum that's evangelistic? So some titles that have worked, obviously, Rick Warren, The Purpose-Driven Life. Carrie Shook did 1 Month to Live. And I get some examples. Gene Apple out at Eastside Christian in Anaheim did Hope Rising. Out in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, they did one about fears called Monsters Under the Bed. Church down in Middle Georgia did one called Hand-Me-Downs about leaving a legacy. Church in Indianapolis did a series called Family Matters, kind of an outdated title, but about marriage, family, parenting, relationships. And so, again, you want to pick a topic that would be relevant, that would be pertinent. This is not 100% of the time. This is just to get them started. And then once they're started, then you can begin to introduce them to more mature topics. The key number 3 is, how's your coaching structure? And here's the thing. From when a person says, yes, I want to lead a group, until the group starts, it is mission critical that you have somebody available to them to help them. And it's not, an email distribution list. It's somebody that's willing to pick up the phone, call them, find out what's going on, answer their questions, and encourage them. Because you may have, a guy invites some people over for a barbecue. He wants to start a group, and he says, my group's going to be Tuesday night. Would you guys like to do it? And a couple of them say, oh, we're sorry, we already joined somebody else's group. And a couple more say, oh, Tuesday, we can't do Tuesday. We got something else going. And then the other guy says, hey, I hate to tell you this, but I'm really not your friend. And then obviously this guy's going to feel very, very discouraged, and he needs an experienced leader that can help him out and say, listen, not everybody that I've invited ever showed up for my groups. So let's pray about who God would have in your group. And because this guy's feeling dumb. He's feeling like he never should have been involved. Well, obviously they need encouragement. So this is where you do personally recruit and handpick people that you know, people that you trust, people that are mature, most of all, people who care, that are going to pick up the phone and actually make phone calls. So handpick some of your current leaders, some of the influences in your church, and ask them if they would walk alongside a new group leader for a 6-week study. And then the fourth thing is you want to begin with the end in mind. And before you begin a study, you want to determine what is the next step. And so you do a 6-week campaign or a 40-day campaign, you get to day 41. I mean, 6 weeks, you're going to have a lot of excitement in 6 weeks. In fact, it's pretty easy to get a lot of excitement for 6 weeks. But you get to that day 41, the end of that 6 weeks, and the whole thing can just fall off the cliff. And so you've got to have a next step, that in the middle of the current study, you offer them another study and say, if you would be interested in continuing on as a group, we would like you to do, again, a video-based study so it's easy to use. It could be your own. It could be one that you purchased. And you could say, we're going to offer this to you in the middle of the current study, and then the hope is by the end of that first study, they've made a decision whether or not they're going to move forward. So let me tell you about a couple of churches I work with. This is Van Dyke Church in Lutz, Florida, just north of Tampa, a great United Methodist church. When I started working with them 6 years ago now, they had 1,800 adults on the weekend. They were stuck. They had about 400 adults in groups. They produced their own curriculum. We coached them, and their team produced the curriculum. We added some new strategies to how to recruit, and then we added 60 groups. We went from 400 people in groups to 1,000 people in groups. We turned around, and in the new year of 2012, we did another series that they created. I know this sounds like a lot of work, but stick with me. They went from 1,000 people in groups to 1,600 in groups, and then they did a third series that they created after Easter in 2012, and they went to actually over 2,000 people in groups with 1,800 on the weekend. Well, here's the cool thing. Last fall, I had, the pastor's name is Matthew Hartsfield. I had him on a webinar, and 5 years after we had done this work, they've grown. They're 2,300 on the weekend now, and they still were maintaining 80 to 90% of their adults in groups. And so not only did we build something for 12 months and it was exciting 6 months or 12 months, but rather to see that continue on, and 5 years later to hear that report of this is what we've been able to maintain, shows that it was certainly worth changing some things up and trying some things new. This is my friend down in Orlando. Now his name's Charlie Holt. That's funny. I can't think of Charlie's name. Anyway, he's that pastor of St. Peter's Episcopal. When I first met Charlie about 10, 12 years ago, he had 260 adults in his weekend service. They started 75 groups for 40 Days of Purpose, and the average group was about 10. So a church of 260 adults had 750 people connected into groups, which was pretty amazing. Pastor Troy Jones at New Life Church in Renton, Washington, Great Assemblies of God Church, church of 2,500 on the weekend. They had 100 groups when I started with them. This would have been January of 2015. They produced their own curriculum. We added some different strategies to recruit leaders, to connect people into groups. 6 months later, they did one in the new year. They did one after Easter. They went from 100 groups to 500 groups in a church of 2,500. This is exponential. And they found that Pastor Troy was being introduced to people in his community who had never gone to church through the video teaching in the comfort of their friend's living room. And then they were being invited to church, and this worked so well that they actually made it their goal to have 1,000 groups in their church, in a church of 2,500, which I don't think they're going to be a church of 2,500 for long. And, Renton, Washington is not in the Bible Belt. It's like, in the post-Christian part of the United States. So I'm going to take a couple of questions. I think I mentioned before, I have to go into another webinar. So I've got about 2 minutes. So if you've got a 2-minute question, we're going to do another webinar next week, and I'm not going to have this pressure of something right behind it like today is. And so I'll be able to take more time for your questions. But you can use the chat box, or you can unmute your microphone, either way. And just a couple minutes. If you have a quick question, I'd be glad to take it. If not, then I can see you next time. But any questions?